Leadership does not necessarily mean managing people. Leadership is kind of a state of mind. It's an important distinction, because I tell everybody in our organization, like, I expect you to lead every day. I don't care how many people actually report into you. And there are certain characteristics that we're looking for leadership, and you can start demonstrating them whether or not you have other people depending on you for performance reviews, if you get my drift.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another conversation. Today I am joined by Kate Johnson. She is the president of Microsoft US. So Kate, thanks for joining me again today.
Thanks for having me, Jacob. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to speak with you again. So really curious to get your perspective specifically around leadership, because a lot of people who are going to be watching this are either current or aspiring leaders. Mm-hmm. And I want to start off with why do you think you became a leader? Because I'm assuming you were surrounded by a lot of very smart and talented people mm-hmm. who could have easily have taken the role that you have taken on as president of Microsoft US. But for some reason, you got the role and not anybody else. What makes you so special or unique?
Oh, wow. You're starting with the PhD level before we even get the warm-ups. How about, I don't know.
What's your favorite color?
Yeah.
What did you eat today?
Gosh. That's a really complex question, because it's not like it's my first job. It's not like it's my first role. I'm sort of on the back nine, as they say,
yeah.
Of the career. So it's a culmination of experiences that I think are really well suited to the role of leading commercial transformation at Microsoft. Satya, Judson Althoff, Jean-Philippe Courtois, they needed a leader of the U.S. business that had a combination of things: big deal making, leading large teams, driving change. All of these things I've done in different parts of my career. And so I kind of had the portfolio. I think I'm also the first female president of Microsoft US. And so I think that having a diverse candidate was also important to them. So that's why. I mean, the existential question of why are you a leader at all, I go all the way back to this notion that leadership does not necessarily mean managing people. Leadership is kind of a state of mind. It's an important distinction, because I tell everybody in our organization, like, I expect you to lead every day. I don't care how many people actually report into you. And there are certain characteristics that we're looking for leadership, and you can start demonstrating them whether or not you have other people depending on you for performance reviews, if you get my drift.
Yep. Well, to give people a little bit of context, can you share a little bit about, so how big is the team that you manage, and the P&L? How much money are you responsible for?
So it's $45 billion. It's across all of our products and services, across all customer segments, private and public. And it's a team of 10,000 people. So we do the marketing, the sales, the service, and the operations associated with generating that revenue, which is close to half of the enterprise revenue for Microsoft.
Wow. Yeah. So definitely a considerable size team.
I have a few nights where I kind of stare at the ceiling going, gosh, it's a lot of revenue we got to get.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how this position came about. So what was your experience? I mean, did you live in a lot of different parts of the world? Were you a part of different teams and different roles and functions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer to that is, I've been, in a bunch of different places in companies, but I think it really all started, I got an engineering degree, wasn't the best engineer, and I was in a lab, Bell Labs at the time, which, for those of you that are old enough to remember, was a super great place to be if you were an engineer, part of the research facility of AT&T. But it just wasn't a good fit, and I needed more interaction with people, with customers, and so I went into sales, and AT&T was kind enough to help get me there.
Mm.
But then I realized really quickly that I needed an MBA to sort of augment or round out my education because I was so deeply technical, but I didn't have a lot of the other pieces of
Yeah.
marketing, finance, and all the things that you need in order to lead from a business perspective. And the reality is, it was the job that I had after getting my MBA that kind of opened my mind to who I wanted to be as a leader. And I went into management consulting at Deloitte, and I spent 6 years going across industry,
Mm.
across functions, basically helping large scale enterprises drive change. And I fell in love with that as my thing. Everybody kind of has
Yeah.
a strength or a superpower or whatever. And from my perspective, I had this huge passion towards leading and driving change projects. And that led me from, consulting into banking and then onto the IT side and then, as a CIO and then over to technology companies on the commercial side selling into enterprises because I used to be a buyer and then I became a seller again. And so it's that complement of capabilities that when I was working for General Electric, I'd been asked to help drive commercial intensity at the company, particularly around selling their digital capabilities inside their services organizations.
Yeah.
When Microsoft reached out, it was kind of like, we like your background because you've done so many different things and because the one common theme is change. And we need to change and we need leaders who understand how to do that. And we're hoping that can be you.
So for people who are watching or listening to this who want to become senior leaders inside of an organization, maybe not president, maybe VP, director,
Yeah.
SVP, who
Yeah.
knows, how important is that working in different geographies, in different teams, and getting access to all aspects of the business? How crucial is that?
So from my perspective, the learning is so interesting because I was just having a conversation this weekend with a friend who's an executive at a large health company, and we were talking about generalists, right? Who, a lot of
Yeah.
companies kind of grew generalists, and you go and you went and you ran different functions, and then you ran different parts of the business and P&Ls, and then you made sure that you ticked off the global box and moved your family for a couple of years, and then you came back, and it was almost like moving across was the most important thing. Now, I really think that the pendulum is swinging back, and we need people who are deep in certain things. And I always tell people I'm working with, you got to pick. Are you going to be that generalist, or are you going to be somebody who goes deep in one thing, whether it's a function like finance and you want to be a CFO and you've always known that,
Yeah.
or is it something horizontal that you're picking like change or something like that. And I don't think there's a right answer. I think the world is going to continue to be hybrid because we need both. We need the deep experts, and then we need, the people who can kind of be a utility player and pinch hit. I think it's getting harder to get the big jobs as a utility player, that hasn't at least gone deep in certain things and
Yeah.
owned the implementation of the changes that they've dreamed up. The days of doing something for 18 months and moving on I think are gone. I think that's very, very deleterious to your overall experience. I think you need to own what you've built and prove that it works before you move on to the next thing. And that's not 18 months, that's 3 years, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then global experience, I've lived all over the United States and I've traveled all over the world, spending no more than 5 months, I think is the longest place that, I ever did a project. It just happened to be in South Korea. But I've pretty much been to, dozens of countries and spent an enormous amount of time because proximity is super key. So if you want to be a leader in a global company, you're going to have to show that you've learned about the different cultures that are going to be on the hook for buying whatever it is that you're selling. And you can only get that with proximity and partnership from the people in those geographies who are willing to teach you about the nuances of those cultures. That can never replace, a few years of assignment in those different geos, which I'm a huge proponent of, but I
Yep.
personally never actually relocated my family to another country.
Yeah, so that different exposure, it sounds like, is important to different,
I think it
because
is.
and different people as well, right? I mean, different
Right.
backgrounds to learn as much as you can. Uh, do you think COVID has changed leadership much?
Oh, heck yes. Yeah. I mean, where do you start with that one, right? Yeah. So the first thing is crisis management. It reminded us all that that is a core capability that every leader needs to have, and that there's this moment of surge capacity where you're responding, and how you handle that with optimism, with calm, with organization to give all of your people comfort that, hey, we're in this together, we're going to get through it. That's like one whole area of expertise that I think we were all reminded of how important it is. And I'm particularly proud of the executives at Microsoft, and how they kind of, not just, they didn't just bring that game to us inside the company, but we brought a lot of that to our customers. The second thing is the agility of your portfolio and your go to market, and okay, the world just changed overnight. For Microsoft, how do we take our existing technology capabilities, which so many companies were slow to adopt, and make it easier for them to adopt so that they can do years of digital transformation in hours and days, so just so that they could stay in business. And that was a whole different sort of crisis management, and response that we needed to do. But then there's you run out of surge capacity, Jacob. I think we all realize that, whether we're an individual contributor or a leader of large teams. It's been monotonous, and I don't know about you, but I see the fatigue in myself and my people. I see days where we're overwhelmed, and days where we think everything's going to be fine, and there's no telling which day it's going to be when you wake up. It's really kind of interesting. And so this notion of employee experience and employee wellness has become of paramount importance, which is fascinating because it always should have been. But I think today, now we realize it's almost existential that we have that forefront in our mind.
Well, what do you personally look for in a leader? So somebody that you want to promote inside of your company to be a senior
Yeah.
member of your team. What are the qualities you look for?
Yeah, I liked it when I arrived and learned what the principles of leadership were at Microsoft, because it resonated so much with what I had always kind of emphasized. But I think that the notion of laying out what that is for teams is really important, and it's a leader is somebody who can generate clarity so that we all know where it is that we're headed,
Yeah.
right? It's about generating energy, right? Because you got to get people excited and motivated to go chase whatever that goal is. And then it's about knowing how to deliver success and being able to define it in a way that resonates with every single human on the ground. And so those three kind of notions of clarity, energy, and success are the fundamentals of what you need to have in order to be a leader, certainly on my team. But I would say on any team, those qualities are really important, even at, like I said, at the individual contributor level, because if you have somebody that can demonstrate that, just as a collaborative member of the team, then you know that they're going to be pre-qualified to be a great people manager,
Yep.
right? So we look for it in individuals, and then as you sort of advance through the ranks, we're looking for more and more intensive examples of how you bring that to bear.
What do you think of, I hear this sometimes, I'm curious if you come across this. So people who are very, very excited about leadership, but sometimes they feel like their leaders or the organization is kind of clipping their wings, so to speak. Do you think it's important for a leader who feels like they're not unable to unlock their full potential to move elsewhere, or to try to figure it out within the company that they're already a part of?
Yeah. Again, great question. And so you look at my past. I've worked for 6 companies. So you go, oh, well, from one perspective, you bounced around. From another perspective, I have had kind of a long career. I'm on the back nine, but I always went to a new company because of the opportunity that was there. And and so I'm a strong believer that it's okay. You don't have to work for the same company for 30 years and go from the bottom to the top every time. That's just not, that's not the reality that we live in, right?
Yeah.
However, I do think there's this notion of organizational patience. I've had to actually develop some of that myself, because you can't just peel out and go get a better offer every time something's not going your way. And I mean, we all know we're going to bump into leaders that don't necessarily bring out the best in all of us. And
Yeah.
I think developing this notion of, resilience and how to deal with that is super important for the longevity of a career, but also to develop the empathy for those people that you start to manage of what are the things that you need to avoid because they didn't work for you. You don't want to repeat history and make the same mistakes that your bad managers made, right?
Yeah.
So, but all of that requires a growth mindset. You got to be totally in the game to learn. And you have to realize that the pace of change of the market that we're living in is also putting pressure on the pace of change in our leadership styles, our organizational frameworks, et cetera. So the bad boss that you're working for today, with the exception of if I'm on the senior leadership team reporting to the CEO who's not going anywhere, I always tell middle management, like, it's literally anywhere from 90 days to 18 months could be the time that you have to deal with this. And that amount of time is not that long. You can almost hold your breath for that long. So muscle through it and see what you're going to learn and how you're going to apply those learnings as the takeaway. That
What
being
do you?
said, if you're being demeaned or if there's, real issues with how you're being treated, emotionally, you got to fix that. You work with
Yeah.
HR, you work with peers, you work with other managers or mentors to address it. And of course, you have open and transparent conversations with your managers. But
Couldn't agree more. What do you think the biggest difference is between mid-level leaders and senior level leaders? I mean, not from a functional perspective, but as far as skills or mindsets,
yeah.
what is it that the senior leaders can do that the mid-level leaders, they're not quite there yet?
So there's this notion when you're driving change. It's called the frozen middle. And the frozen middle is like this phenomenon. You can read about it in, Harvard case studies and things like that. It's this notion of human behavior. We all pivot towards the things we're most comfortable with. So when you're trying to drive change, you kind of lean into, well, I like the idea of change, but I don't actually want to change the things I do every single day because that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so it's the comfortable stuff that I'm going to stick with. And one of the things inside of that frozen middle that we're learning about as a team is this kind of notion of implementation versus ownership. So, and I can spot the difference with like a 3-minute conversation now with anybody in my organization. And if a middle manager is implementing change, there's huge risk. Okay. And the risk comes from the perspective of, they read or they hear about whatever it is that they're supposed to get their teams to do, and they attribute accountability to the leader. Like, Kate wants us to drive culture change, so we're going to have to do X, Y, and Z,
Yeah.
box ticking event. That's a middle manager who's kind of implementing and will immediately fall back to what's comfortable for them and will kind of represent that frozen middle, if you will. A middle manager who owns the change themselves and says, here's what we're trying to do at Microsoft. Here's our role in that story. And they bring passion and clarity to it. And it's theirs. And they're telling their people, we have to do this because here's the outcome that we're seeking. And this is the role that we can play in that. And they get excited about that. That is the difference between somebody who can run the place versus somebody who can't.
I love it.
And by the time they get to be, on the executive leadership team, I'm looking for ownership left to right of everything Satya Nadella has laid out for us, and he has laid it all out. And all we got to do is excite our people to get through that. But it's hard, And
Yeah.
finding managers who understand the nuances between those two things and have the courage to be vulnerable and get it wrong, that's night and day.
Yeah, I love that distinction between implementation and ownership because there's a fine line, but it's also very, very clear
Right,
who's implementing versus who has some sort of stake in it.
right.
Before we get back to the show, I just wanted to remind you to head over to defineleadership.com to grab my new PDF that is going to walk you through a framework for how you can personally define leadership and why that matters. You will also hear from CEOs and how they define leadership, and you're going to hear from CEOs from organizations like KPMG, Oracle, and Verizon. So again, that is defineleadership.com if you want to grab that PDF while it's available. And now, back to the show. Leadership is also one of those things that's changing all the time. Do you do anything special to keep up, to make sure that you're still relevant, current?
So it's a great question. Look, we all are on the hook to continue to improve our game and to learn and to figure out like what's a new technique or a new methodology or new inspiration that I can use
Yeah,
to show up at work and get everybody excited about, as I own these changes, right? And I think we're all on the hook to keep reading. There's you can't get around that. There's Blinkist and things like that maybe give you a little bit of a shortcut where you get the nuggets. But the reality is you got to stay fresh on the theory. I adore the works of Brene Brown, Adam Grant. I'm starting to read more from just leaders that I knew or had a sort of a passion for what they were doing, and I'll always keep one or more of those by my bedside, as my inspiration. I will say that as leaders today, with all the information that's available, when I wake up in the morning, I'm expected to know everything that's going on in the marketplace,
yeah,
everything that's going on in my country, which is my territory, the latest and the greatest management techniques. And so it's super hard to do that.
it
And
is.
and I kind of use my own way of doing shortcuts. Like for example, I follow every news source on Instagram. So I'm
Oh,
talking about like NPR, all of my favorite journalists, the BBC, various global networks, etc. And I have it on a separate channel, and I fly through it, and I can get most of what I need. I also follow the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times on that as well. And I'm getting the highlights, and it gets smarter as the more things I dig
yeah.
into, it plates up some stuff. So you have to be careful about that. But it's a fabulous way in 15 minutes over a cup of coffee while I'm warming up for the day to make sure that nothing breaking had come through that I wasn't sort of on. And then I exercise a lot. So I'm super into podcasts because that's also a way where you're not just sitting there page by page or digital page by digital page, and you get these sort of characters in your head talking about all the things that we need to know. So I guess there's no one magic bullet for me. I'm kind of looking for it everywhere.
How do you, since you were talking about coffee when you're warming up your day, how do you plan or structure your day?
Well, so I have a lot of help, right? So, personally, I'm one of those people that needs a lot of sleep. So I shoot for 8 hours, which is highly unusual, I think, for my peer group. I know
Yeah.
a lot of my peers are like, "Hey, if I get 5, I'm good. If I get 5, I'm close to death." So I make space for that, and that actually requires a huge amount of discipline. So my family understands that I'm doing that. I kind of open up the 10 to 6 area for I'm either sleeping or trying to sleep during that time. That's super important to get out of the gate. I get out of the gate with all the reading and the coffee, and then the day is kind of balanced. I spend probably about 20% of my time on my people, one-to-ones, learning about them, or even community events, making sure I have proximity to what's on their minds. I spend another, quarter of the time on deals and the business and making
Yep.
sure that the context of what we're doing is right. I spend another quarter of the time meeting with customers to make sure that I'm talking with them pretty much every day. We used to do it before COVID. I used to do it in waves, like a week a month. I would immerse in a week of customer stuff and then we would process it all. I don't need to do that anymore because I don't have to fly there. So I do it every single
Yeah.
day instead. And, I have an expectation of how many customers I can talk to every single day. And then the last quarter is like, the emergency of the day, right? You're always getting something coming in hot that you have to kind of rearrange. But that's sort of how we try and structure it so I can be with my people and customers and think about the scorecard and the nature of the business, but then also leave some flexibility for whatever it is that's happening that moment.
Is there something that you think you do on a regular basis that makes you a better leader? Like, I don't know, your personal leadership tip, hack, technique, strategy that you do?
I'm just use that word proximity. I learned it from Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy,
Yeah.
and just this incredible leader who spent his entire career after Harvard Law dedicating his life to serving those that weren't properly served by all of our processes in the country. And I went to visit him in Montgomery, Alabama, and I said, "Hey, look, how are you doing this whole empathic leadership thing? And how do I, as somebody who has a 10,000 person organization, how do I show up in that way and how do I drive it at scale?" And he gave us this formula for it. Empathy requires proximity, and then you got to, be a great storyteller and create a narrative. You have to be hopeful. You can't be
Yeah.
negative all the time. And then you have to learn how to actually action everything that you're doing. I honed in on this one thing called proximity and said, how close am I to the things that matter most? Customers, our people, and our business itself. And I took a good long look in the mirror and I was like, I don't think I'm nearly close enough. I spent a whole lot more time in corporate, headquarters metaphorically than I should. And so I really worked with my leadership team and with all of the extended leadership team to change that and created a quarter of the time for one-to-ones with people at all levels in the business and a quarter of the time for one-to-ones with customers at all levels in the organization. And I think it's made a really big mistake. That's not to say that I'm like this perfect leader or anything, but if there was one thing that I would say has helped me improve my game over the past couple of years, it's every day waking up and saying, how close to the things that matter most am I? Or am I just counting on filters all the time? The story of the story of the story of the story. By the time it gets to me, do I really
Yeah.
know the details? Now you can't micromanage, but proximity is a very, very, very powerful tool.
How important is the relationship aspect to being a good leader? Because sometimes we can get very caught up on, closing deals, making a lot of money, process, delegating. But you've mentioned several times that you make a lot of time for people, for one-on-ones, for customers.
Yeah.
Is the relationship aspect still very crucial for your or for anybody's success as a leader?
I think it's everything. So we have to unlock people in order to unlock the path to performance.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to get performance if you can unlock your people. And the only way you can unlock your people is if they feel deeply trusted, if they feel like they have everything they need from you and the company. And if they don't have it, if you're trying to get it for them, it keeps them in flight for a really long time. If they feel like they can be successful, like there are all these things that if you can unlock a person, you just be so excited by how far they can go. And it's the
Yeah.
people that drive this business at scale. And that's, again, it's kind of like another thing that I've learned is that I can't be everywhere and do everything. I can't micromanage this. I have to do this at scale. And the way to unlock the people is to get close to them to understand what it is that they need,
Yeah.
to be that evangelist, right? Back to the leaders of the company to say, okay, guys, this is what it's going to take for us to be successful. You're not pointing fingers or blaming anybody. You're saying, here's what great looks like, and here's what your role in that great story is. Help me help our team deliver customer success.
Yeah.
And all of that, I think, is relationship based, is people based.
Yep. No, of course, I agree with everything you're saying. If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice, what would you tell your younger self?
Um, probably stop listening to the voice inside your head. First of all, this whole thing is like, it all seems so important every day. Every mistake
Yeah.
you make, every win you have seems so big. And then when you start to have a couple decades under your belt, you realize it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So you probably should think that way from day one, but you don't have enough context to understand that. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, most of us are competing more with the voice in our head than with any external factor. And that voice in your head can keep you from learning. It can make you feel ashamed when you make mistakes. It can really be deleterious to your growth. And one of the things that, even just at this phase of my career, that I'm learning to do is to make it quiet and to
Mm.
have the voice in my head give me a break. Because I'm working hard. I'm trying to do my best, and I'm going to keep skinning my knee. But that I think is the most important thing. I think the other thing is the practicing. So there's one thing to learn something theoretically. You read that book, you listen to that podcast, you acquire knowledge somehow. I find that if I don't practice it in everyday life, that I haven't actually gained that learning. And you have to be very intentional about how it is that you're going to grow and what you're going to apply in order for it to be super tangible and translatable to your people and codified in a way that you can put in your performance review, for
Yeah.
example. And so those are the two things: the voice inside my head, and get more intentional about what I was going to learn, how I was going to practice that on a regular basis.
The voice inside your head's an interesting one because I feel like a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah.
Any tips that you have found to be effective to either quiet it or maybe turn it into a more positive voice instead of maybe one that can be more negative or critical?
Yeah, I said that I was a huge fan of Brene Brown. We're rolling her training Dare to Lead out to, all 10,000 people. We're on week 2 of rolling it out to the individual contributors now. And there's a section called Rising Strong. And Rising Strong is all about resilience through failure and the techniques that you use. And the thing that resonates most with me is this idea that if you're quiet about something, embarrassing or humiliating or shameful or whatever,
Yeah.
it tends to balloon and grow and keep you up at night and overtake aspects of your life. That's certainly true with me. And that's the voice inside your head that's negative, that's saying, wow, you really screwed up. And, it can wake me up out of a dead sleep. And we talked about how much sleep I need in order to be healthy and productive. And so I took that chapter really seriously and said, I want to kind of conquer this thing. And the first step to it is actually addressing it and writing it down. Like, what is your biggest fear? What, that you look like an idiot? Or that
Like
people,
actually writing it down?
yeah, and so you go and you actually, it's really funny. I have this book in my desk here, and it's a workbook. And there's a section in here for the voice inside your head. And when you're going through an embarrassing moment or a failure or setback of some kind, first step is you write down what that setback was. And the second step is you write down every fear that you have associated with it. And I'll give you a great example. Remember, we talked about learning and trying to practice?
Yeah.
Well, so I'm doing this, right? Because I'm asking everybody to do it. So I've got to demonstrate that. I had this moment in an SLT meeting with Satya and staff a couple weeks ago, and I asked a question that many interpreted as, not the smartest question that anybody's ever asked. And I immediately felt that hot face and embarrassment, and I was kind of like, oh shoot! And in a virtual world, when the conversation moves on, you can't bring everybody back and clarify it, especially if it's just to address your own humiliation. Well, so, that night I'm like staring at the ceiling, imagining in my head that this was 10 times worse than it probably really was. And so the next day we're at breakfast, my daughter, my husband, and I'm like, guys, do something. And they're like, okay. And I said, I gotta tell you what happened yesterday and what is going on in my mind and everything. And you name it. And that big fat shame bubble turns into this tiny little molecule that you just toss away. So they actually said, I don't think that was a dumb question. And I was like, well, you weren't there. And they're like, no, no, listen to us. That wasn't a dumb question. And and then when you get this sort of third party opinion and you've actually put it on the table of how you feel about something, you start to realize 99% of it is your
Yeah.
imagination. And
Yep.
the reality is, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, stop worrying about what people think about you, because the truth is they're not. Right? And if that's like one of these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, they're not thinking about me. Well, am I relieved or am I kind of disappointed about that? Which is a whole nother set of issues, but it's a really important thing is like, if you can quiet the voice inside your head with these tools, it is breakthrough. And
Yeah.
it's going to give you a lot more runway to learn.
I love that. I think that's I love the analogy of like the shame bubble to a tiny molecule that you just throw over your head. I know we only have a couple minutes left, so maybe just a few last questions to wrap up. First one is, what is the best piece of advice that you have for aspiring leaders? So people who are not in a leadership position yet, but who want to get there. Any advice for that group?
Demonstrate it now. Be the leader, the people manager, the people leader that you want to be. Be that person right now. Use whatever your role is to create clarity, generate energy, and deliver success. Because those are the muscles that you need to lead people, and you can
Mm-hmm.
practice it no matter what your job is. Literally, if you're in a customer call center and you're sitting on the desk, taking calls, you can do it there just like you can do it if you're leading a 10,000 person organization.
Yeah. What about advice for seasoned leaders? So people who have been in leadership, but they want to get better. They want to keep improving. They aspire to get to your level. What advice do you have for them?
I think it's seeking that learning, kind of the idea that your game is not fixed, right? That it can constantly get better no matter who you are. You can get better and better and better, but you have to open yourself up to it. I think the kryptonite for leaders is hubris. Thinking
Wow.
you're right, thinking you know the answer, deadly. And especially when you're in the middle manager, trying to go up to the next few levels, it's super deadly because you're perceived as being narrow in your thought and showing up to the boardroom to prove you're right instead of showing up to the boardroom to get it right is all the difference in the world. And I think something that a lot of times leaders, I know for the past couple of decades, before I started really understanding what my role is, I thought I was supposed to be right, and being right was how I got promoted to the next level. That is not the role of a leader. The role of a leader is bringing everybody together with diversity of thought and perspective to try and figure out the best answers to the problems today, which may be different than tomorrow. So you have to be agile in that process.
Yeah, and you actually answered the next question I was going to ask you, and that was the most dangerous trait that a leader can possess, but you already said hubris. And
Hubris,
that's
it
actually,
started with the Romans, right? And
yeah,
if you look at the downfall of every single, sort of leader or organization, whether it's in corporate or whether it's government or, it doesn't matter. Hubris is the kryptonite of leadership.
yeah, and a couple of people I've interviewed actually said that same thing, so couldn't agree more. And maybe one of the last questions for you, is there a resource that you think leaders need to be aware of, whether it's a book, a podcast, anything that you think is important for people who are watching or listening to this to check out to become a better leader?
I'll just tell you my two favorites, and I typically listen to their podcasts and read all their books. Is Adam Grant and Brene Brown. And by the way, there's overlap there. I
Yeah.
started with Carol Dweck with Growth Mindset of being the single most important source for leaders, and working on that every single day. And then I kind of fell in love with the next step being Brene, and the idea of vulnerability in the context of learning. And now Adam Grant's taking it to a new level where I think he's bringing some fresh context and connecting it to the corporate world really with a great amount of facility. The other thing is, John Levy is writing a book, or has written a book. It's coming out soon. He's the founder of the Influencers, and it's this notion of creating relationships and taking all of these things that these social scientists and behaviors have created and taking it to the next level in terms of applicability to sales, which just happens to be one of my passions, right? So I don't know. And every year I kind of try and glue the next thought leader on to that trajectory. And so that's kind of the sources that I love to point people to because they've inspired me so much. But I think everybody can come up with their own list, right, Jacob?
Yep. Yep. And very last question for you. Is there something that you think I should have asked you but didn't about how to become a better or more effective leader? Or anything else that you want to share that we didn't get to?
Other than forgetting to start with my favorite color, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of things, and like I said, it's this notion of growth mindset that's the most important thing, and how do you actually get that? I think is the fundamental question for all leaders. How do you get to the point where you can learn and grow every single day? And I think all of your questions kind of laddered up to that.
I hope so. Well, Kate, thank you again for taking time out of your day and sharing your insights. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Thanks for tuning into this show. I really do hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to head over to defineleadership.com to grab a copy of my brand new PDF that's going to walk you through a framework on how to create your own personal definition of leadership and why that matters now more than ever. You will also see the definitions of leadership from some of the CEOs I interviewed, including from the CEOs of organizations like KPMG, Oracle, and Verizon. Again, you can get that PDF at defineleadership.com. And of course, I would love it if you subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos just like this and for interviews with some of the world's top business leaders. Thank you for watching.